Quentin, I have really desired to know whether there is a God, as many people. I've certainly heard the theistic arguments, many of them from different styles, not just theistic arguments, but arguments for supernatural causes. I really need to and want to understand the atheistic argument, arguments not just against the theists, but affirmative arguments for atheism.
I think an affirmative argument for atheism would be that a naturalistic conception of the world based on science, it can completely explain why the universe exists and why the universe began to exist in the Big Bang, and it can explain why the universe was caused to exist. Because there's no first initial instant that's uncaused that God could cause. Because take a real line segment, which is all decimals, and taken from 0 to 1. Now, according to current science, at the 0 instant, there is no state universe at all because it's physically impossible. And there is no earlier instant than that, and there's no earliest instant that is the one immediately next after 0, because the nature of real numbers is there's a continuum between them.
And it's an infinite number of real numbers between 0 and 1.
Right, exactly, right.
So you can run the movie back as far as you want. There's always going to be something before it.
Right, and right. Something before it means that every single instant is caused by earlier instance, and you're never going to find an instant that's not caused by earlier instance.
And you believe that that explanation is a full 100% causal explanation for the existence of the whole universe.
Yes, and I think it shows that it's not possible for something else like God or any external cause to cause the universe, because that is sufficient to cause the universe.
So that's your first argument affirmatively for atheism. What's a second?
Well, a second could be that theism, it tries to have it both ways in its arguments by assuming part of science and then as a picture of the universe, and then trying to explain it in terms of God, which is a notion that's inconsistent with science. Like they might take the so-called fine-tuning of the values just after the Big Bang that were just right for the evolution of human life. But they're relying on science to reach that conclusion. But if they're relying on science, they can't consistently try and explain that with an idea that's inconsistent with science. Science says there are no minds without bodies. And if you believe there are, you're rejecting the scientific method. And so you're rejecting the very method that led you in the first place to the fine-tuning at the beginning of the universe that you want to try and explain.
So you're rejecting the fine-tuning argument as exemplifying the internal inconsistency of using that argument in support of some supernatural explanation.
Right. This is like saying, I accept a scientific theory, but I'm going to explain that scientific theory by a theory that contradicts science. And that itself is a contradiction. You can't explain a scientific data by an explanation that contradicts the method and data and theories that are evidence for that data.
And the theistic argument that is contradicting science is what?
Oh, any theistic argument. I mean, any theistic argument regarding the creation of the beginning of the universe, the Big Bang, the fine-tuning, the arguments involving evolution, they all are inconsistent with science because they started off and say, well, here's what science shows us as some evidence. Now, this is evidence for God. Well, once they make that move, that's the contradiction.
Aren't you engaging in your own vicious cycle? Because you're going from an assumption of that everything, you're defining theism as anti-science. So anything that theism then does is a contradiction, because any theistic assumption is anti-science by your definition.
Yes, I think theism was in effect the science of over 2,000 years ago. And it would be like somebody now believing Aristotle's science, when in fact they've missed the change with Galileo and Newton and missed a further change with Einstein and quantum mechanics. And they're still trying to believe a worldview that made sense only with Aristotle.
In the sense that theism was the dominant worldview for a long period of time, in its different forms, in its Greek form, or in its early Christian form, Middle Age Christian form, Hindu. The various cultures in the world have had a very long culture of theism as its dominant worldview. Today, the dominant worldview is certainly science. And so theism has in essence become the opposition as opposed to the majority.
Right. Today there's a poll recently in Nature showing 93% of the top scientists are atheists. Now, the reason for that is that Aristotelian science had a place for a God to exist as moving what they call the heavens, which they thought the stars moved around the earth. But subsequent to that, both Galileo and Newton showed that assumption was false, and also Einstein's and quantum mechanics showed it was false, and they were able to explain things that not only did not need a God to explain things, but precluded God as a possible explanation.
Yeah, I don't want to leave that poll unanswered because indeed it's true, but if you look at some of the data beneath that, a much higher percentage of not top scientists do believe in God. I think the number's like 40% or more. And one cannot rule out a sociological explanation to where top scientists because of their visibility or recognition, feel obligated to be part of the dominant culture. I mean, one can make an argument because it's not 93% of all scientists, it's 93%
Right.
of a segment of scientists.
Right. Well, one can put it this way, that there's a greater proportion of scientists who believe that God does not exist than there is of any other academic or non-academic field. And the question is, why is that?
I think I think it's true, and it's an important question.